Hi guys, before we begin today, I just want to take a really quick second and say thank you to our listeners. Thank you guys so much. Your support has made the Nickelodeon Animation Podcast incredibly successful across all of our platforms. Cannot thank you guys enough. That is because of you and your listenership, and you guys are liking it and sharing it. So we appreciate it. So thank you guys so much. Let's get into the show today. Here we go.
Ow! Yeah! That's some kung fu, Frog.
We're not kung fu frogs. We're Ninja Turtles.
Nick, Nickelodeon!
From Nickelodeon Studios in Burbank, California, this is the Nickelodeon Animation Podcast. Hi guys, welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Hector Navarro, and I am so beyond thrilled to be sitting in the recording booth here at Nickelodeon today because I cannot wait to talk to our very special guest today, near and dear to my heart, co-creator of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, one of the most successful comic book franchises in history. The world that he helped co-create is the definition of a pop culture phenomenon. I am, of course, sitting today next to Mr. Kevin Eastman. This is really great. Thanks so much for coming in.
Well, thanks all you guys for coming on a Sunday.
Let's talk about your coming up. Let's talk about your childhood. Do you have an early memory of animation?
I used to love, the old Popeye cartoons, the Woody Woodpeckers, the Fritz Lang, the really crazy ones. Bugs Bunny, Chuck Jones, Horton Hears a Who, Grinch Stole Christmas, that kind of stuff. I remember those as just that. And one of the things I really loved was the early Rankin Bass. That was a ritual. Back in those days. Yeah. You had 2 or 3 TV channels that came in good in this small town in Maine, and you'd wait for Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer to come out. Every year they do Wizard of Oz and Rudolph, Rudolph, I love the Rankin Bass stuff.
Who are some of your creative influences coming up?
My biggest creative influence growing up was Jack Kirby. I read comic books, and I was, a little background, my grandmother painted, my father used to doodle a lot, so there was, I have definitely an artistic background. My talent's inherited, but I sort of went all the way down the rabbit hole, if you will. I grew up in a very small town in Maine, had a paper route. I'd take my $2.75 I'd make each month, drive down, ride my bike down to the comic store. They were 20 cents a piece then. I get 10 comic books, a Yoo-Hoo and a Twinkie, and sit and read half the comic books on the step of the store, and then bike home and read the rest. But,
that sounds great.
Jack Kirby's Commandy, literally, that was, I lived in a small town in Maine, and I literally thought, Commandy, the last boy on Earth. I felt like I was, the last boy on Earth. But
love Commandy. It was influenced, I think, heavily by Planet of the Apes. Yep. And I remember reading somewhere that was one of the first movie you remember seeing. That must have had a huge influence too.
Totally, it was actually. My sister took us to the movies once, and I think she wanted to see it, and we might have been a little too young for it. But I remember watching that and going like, "Holy smokes!" It was like it had such an impact, and that's what I think I really gravitated to Commandy about. It was definitely a furtherance of that whole concept. Yeah. But man, that was it. And I remember, I used to trace, Jack Kirby drawings, and you read comics all the time to the point of, my mother used to go like, when I wasn't doing my chores, she said, you draw all the time. You better be good at that because you're not good at anything else.
Talk a little bit about when you, as a youth, knew that you were going to be a comic book creator.
Well, it's something that never, once I sort of latched onto it, I just never let go. It was, I'd, every chance I could, I'd buy comic books, scour flea markets, I'd memorize storylines. I had my favorite artist, and I'd draw and write and draw my own stories all the time. And even, going through, I think it was 7th and 8th grade, a friend of mine, actually 2 buddies of mine, Jim McNorton and David Peabody, formed their own little comic company. And so we used to draw and create our own little comic books and do them on this mimeograph machine. It was like that. You kind of had to trace the drawings, and then you could print out about 20 of them. So we used to try to sell our own comic books around school in 7th and 8th grade.
Oh, wow.
And, when I got into high school, it was one of those things where around the time that it was kind of uncool to like comic books, I I really didn't care. I still wanted to do them. And I actually had one of my great early influences was in high school. I had an art teacher named Jane Hawks, and when I said, "You're pretty good at drawing. What do you want to do?" and I said, "I want to draw comic books," and she's one of the first people that didn't laugh, and she said, "Well, okay. Well, if you want to draw comic books, it seems to me that." To draw a comic book story, you have to literally draw everything you can see. If you're going to draw a story that has, people, cars, desks, chairs, furniture in perspective, she said, and so she used to give me all these extra assignments in my sketchbook to draw. She said, I don't want you to draw superheroes. I don't want you to draw this. I want you to bring in drawings of tables, chairs, anything, because you have to be able to draw all that stuff. And she was real supportive, and I keep in touch with her to this day.
I understand why they're turtles. I've heard that story. It's because there's no funnier animal to be a Bruce Lee expert, of martial arts than a turtle. So great, got that. So I understand why they're ninjas. Check. It's hilarious. It's great. I can even understand the mutant part because it's like, okay, you got to justify how a turtle could be up and walking around. But the teenager part, why teenagers?
Well, I think it's if you put everything you said, and that's kind of what we did, is we put everything into a blender, if you will. Our favorite isms from the things that we loved as movies and comics, mostly comics as kids. And it always seemed like, Peter Parker was the perpetual teenager.
Yeah.
There was a lot of, and around that time when the Turtles came out, there was a really popular series called New Mutants. Which is teenagers becoming, X-Men.
The next class of X-Men, because all the other X-Men had kind of aged up to become adults. So that's right.
Because it was, and actually, it was the true collaboration, the awesome Peter Laird and I that all started as a joke, and this whole thing was, I was calling them Ninja Turtles.
Yeah.
And I did the pencil drawing, and then when Pete inked it in, he added the Teenage Mutant part, and it was just a natural. We were just completely goofing around, just having a great time. And we both looked at this drawing of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and said, this is the dumbest thing we've ever seen. So, we had to do something with it. What's so bizarre is that, when we did the first issue, we really didn't think we'd sell any copies of the first issue.
Yeah.
And it was done as a parody. And, I used to work cooking lobsters in a restaurant in Maine. We put out the first issue in May of 1984. Then I went back and did my summer job. Yeah. And then that fall, Peter gave me a call and one of our regular catch-ups, and he said, we're still getting calls from comic stores and distributors. They want to know when the second issue is coming out. And we're like, we didn't think about doing a second issue. And so when we started, what should we do with a second issue? That was really, we started making it less of a parody and writing it more for ourselves. We just, we had no editors. We had no company we were working for but ourselves. So we just put everything we loved about the comics and the things that we could relate to, things that we wanted to read into the stories, and that's where we continued. Yeah. And we were writing for ourselves, but it was resonating with a lot of fans, which is puts us in their universe.
At what point did you guys know that the Ninja Turtles were going to be like a pop culture phenomenon?
When you're kind of in the middle of the storm, I guess, for maybe a bad analogy, we didn't really realize it.
Sure.
And to us, I always like to bring up the second issue because we started working on the second issue. We just solicited for it. And then when the orders came in, because we sold 3,000 copies of the first issue, and we got orders for 15,000 of book 2.
Wow.
And Peter called, all excited. He said, we got the orders in. And he said, 15,000 copies. I did the math. After we pay all the bills, we'll make about $2,000 each pre-tax. And we can eat all the macaroni and cheese we want. We can pay our rent, and we can draw comic books for a living. And that was it. That's when I quit my job, and that's when So to me, one of the coolest and most awesome moments was when I got to be Jack Kirby, and then both Peter and I got to start drawing comic books for a living in 1985. But then, it just didn't stop. It just kept going. Each issue, the sales creeped up higher and higher, and when I think we were selling around 100,000 copies of the comic book, and that's when we started working with the Playmates and Murakami Wolf on the animated show. And that was one of those things, too, that we never thought, this worked as a comic book fine, but we just don't see how it's going to translate into a cartoon show.
Sure.
And I think 1988 was the year that, the first 5-part Turtle cartoon came out, and the toys came out in July. June or July, and they were just selling like crazy. And that's probably the year when we said, oh my goodness, this actually can be bigger than a comic book. We don't know how it's working. We don't know why it's working, but people are digging it. So.
Why do you think that the Turtles can translate so well to an animated format?
Well, I think it's especially, we're so fortunate these days with, technology and things, what we can do in movies, that can actually bring the comic books we loved reading and growing up, or even reading now, bring them to life as a live action format. But in those days, animation was the only way you could get some of, those kind of characters and the Krangs and the Bebop and Rocksteady and all that stuff working as an animated series. But I think that, as we think about it, I thought about it a lot over the years, and I feel like, because the Turtles were, they weren't any specific, race or person or stereotype. It's like they were 4 green mutant teenagers, and they just wanted to be teenagers. So I think that, a lot of kids everywhere around the world even, could relate to them without saying like, that they've been left out, and they could relate to. It's like, look, it's just this, because, I think growing up we all feel like mutants.
Yeah.
So who wants to try it? I do. Toss me the teapot.
The teapot?
Turtle, pod, teapot. I am so good at naming stuff.
Did you guys ever intend to put a sort of subconscious immigrant story into the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
No, not so much in that it was, specific. There were elements of that, but it was more like we wanted a kind of a strong father figure.
Yeah.
And sort of, that 3 men and a baby, or 1 rat and 4 mutant baby kind of things. Is that this character was not something it was expecting to be part of his life, or the changes that went through his life, but he adopted the role and fell in love with his sons and wanted to raise them and do the right thing, which is always the underlying message of I guess our favorite characters in movies and ourselves, is that we always want to be that person that does the right thing. We want to be the hero, the one that does all the right thing. So I think that what we did love about that element, so we had the father figure first, and the sons and the adopted family, because I think that even today that everybody is sort of, they have their real family, but they also have their adopted family.
Absolutely.
You think it's like, you work at Starbucks, the people that work with you become your family and your friends.
Totally. Your friends growing up. And absolutely. So, that's beautiful.
So I think it's that kind of thing. But I always loved I was a huge fan of history. I mean, that was, Peter as well. So I think we just loved the Asian culture, the history, and people always, one of the favorite questions is where the Turtles' names come from.
Sure.
And I was a huge fan. In my high school graduation year, I did 1980. I did my mural to Leonardo da Vinci, which was like this, Mona Lisa and all this stuff.
Wow.
But I just loved those elements. It was kind of cool to bring that past and present sort of into this one family unit, and that
makes sense.
Again,
it's so
all
cool.
a hodgepodge.
Listen, Master Splinter is my favorite character.
Awesome.
My favorite turtle is Leonardo, but my favorite character is Master Splinter. He's just so wise and so like Yoda-like, and just such a great father. And again, that element of, even though these aren't his biological sons, that makes no difference. He's raising these kids. He loves them as if they are his own. They are his own. And I think that's a beautiful message that that I think a lot of people tap into for the Ninja Turtles.
You must hold on to hope. And with that hope, you must lead by example. You are all truly worthy heroes, and no matter what may come, you have all made me very proud.
All right, so I got to ask you too, Kevin, do you have a favorite turtle?
I think that it's probably one of the most asked questions, and it's difficult to answer because it's like choosing a favorite child, of course.
Know.
But Michelangelo was that first turtle I doodled in 1983. It was had the Bruce Lee thing, had nunchucks strapped to his arms and the mask on it. So I've been partial to Michelangelo, and I always loved the humorous aspect of it.
Totally.
But I love you love them all, and you can do. The kinds of stories you can do with them as a group, the kinds of stories you can do with them individually is fascinating, and it's a great, you can tap into this psyche of that. But my favorite character to go to for telling stories is Raphael.
Yeah.
Especially I put Raphael and Casey together, and they're like my dog Bob and Doug McKenzie are the two goofball brothers that when they're not beating each other up, they're doing something they shouldn't be doing, or fighting, doing the right thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're all my sons.
Yeah. I love it. Casey and Raph have such a great bromance that they can just get into so much trouble. That's awesome. Do you have a favorite villain from the Turtles universe?
There's man, you can't go wrong with Shredder.
Yeah.
And I love the idea that when we put the first issue out, we killed Shredder at the end of the first issue.
I know.
And we were like, we're never going to be one of those,
Bring back from the dead.
Yeah. And so we held out for, I think 20 issues, and we brought him back, and it was a blast.
Cool.
And he's been back ever since. But Krang from the original Turtles anime series.
So fun.
He was so funny. Just
Krang! Whoa, what's with the gross man baby body?
This will be the last time I have to look at you disgusting turtles. The Krang are letting me go home. I just have to make a few amends, and Dimension X, here I come.
Not so fast, Krang!
Kevin, what is it like to see other creators work on the property that you started, whether it's animation or video games or a different comic book, creations and properties and stories? What is that like?
It's fantastic. Even, in the earliest days, well, you think back when we were reading comic books, there were always different art teams. You had Jack Kirby, Stan Lee writing the Avengers or something, and then there was a new creative team that came in, and some you liked them more, some you liked them less, kind of thing, the storyline that they were exploring. And we did a bunch of that in the early days of the comic books, especially when we started working on the animated series and some of the movies, is that we couldn't keep the regular bi-monthly schedule on the comics up. So other artists that we work with or met at shows, they said, well, I had a turtle story idea, and they would tell us this idea, and we'd be like, well, that's fantastic. It's sort of discovered another side of the turtles we hadn't thought of, or they're looking at it from, because we're living with them every day, and they're inside our head, and they see it from outside. So we really love different elements that they brought into the storylines of different characters, and that just continued when we, even the first animated series, working with David Wise and some of the guys and putting together that. They looked at all the material and came up with some of their own ideas and some of their own angles, especially with the animated series. We were writing down for a much younger audience. We weren't writing for the comic book, the older audience.
Sure.
But every one of the stories that have been explored now over 32 years have been fantastic. I mean, you think of, one of my favorites in recent history was the Turtles Forever movie.
So great.
It was so
love that.
So cool. The we call them the 2000 Turtles with the original 80s Turtles.
Absolutely.
And then the black and white Turtles. So there's a lot of really great, talented, creative people, and what they see in your characters, you kind of like, well, if it's a really, really good idea, we just take credit for it.
Yeah. That's smart. That's really smart. Let's talk about the IDW series for a little bit.
Yes.
How did you, first of all, again, in preparation for today, I went back and reread the first issue of the 2011 IDW Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series. And again, it's great. It's great. And the thing that I love is that it is unmistakably Kevin Eastman layouts. It's unmistakably Kevin Eastman's story. It's got this great slow build. It's so fantastic. How did you get involved with IDW to begin with?
Well, IDW, I've been friends with Ted Adams and Robbie Robbins, the original co-founders of IDW for 20 years or more. And when they secured the license from Nickelodeon Viacom to do the series, Ted called and said, hey, we're going to do this new Turtle series. I'd like to get your input and meet Tom Waltz, who's going to be the head writer. And I was living in LA at the time, and I went down to San Diego, and Tom had this vision that to me was so similar in some respects to kind of what Zero and what Nickelodeon Animation was doing. It was sort of pulling characters in from different Turtle universes and making this new foundation. But Tom actually took it a bit further with his ideas about the reincarnation aspect.
Which I love. I'm a diehard Turtles fan.
It was, and he took it, and some of the other ideas, just sort of, April naming the Turtles, putting her as a scientist, not the reporter kind of thing. And there was, it took all familiar elements and turned them on the ear a little bit. And I really fell in love with his outline. And I said, and Ted was like, well, do you want to do covers? Do you want to do this? And I'm like, I'd like to go all the way, and I'd like to be involved as much as you want me involved. And so I did the layouts. Not that Dan Duncan, who was the artist, he needed layouts, but he really was enthusiastic. It was great to work with him. So I did the layouts for the first bunch of issues, and we just finished. Actually, I think issue 59. I just finished the cover before I came up. But no, the series is. It's great, and it really has evolved into its own universe, and I love that. We have the movies, which are their own universe in some respects, the Nickelodeon universe, which is fantastic, and it's got its own fan base. But the comic books, and that was we worked very closely with Nickelodeon on the series, and they really wanted to make it something that was. edgy, but didn't go too far. But it really really mirrored the original black and white series, and they give us a lot of freedom to do some really cool stuff and really supportive and all great ideas. But yeah, that comic book I'm so passionate about it and love it. And the fans have come back because there were moments when we did stuff in the story where I thought they're gonna lynch us.
Yeah.
Some of the.
The Ninja Turtles have had some great cartoon series. I love the 2003 series. I thought it was a great return to basics. It was fantastic. But cut to 2012, and Nickelodeon premieres Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Why do you think the show gets it so right?
Man, it's I point to this, there's such an awesome team at Nickelodeon. Anyway, I point to Ciro Neely first because I think that, I actually knew Ciro before. He came on as one of the main executive producers of the series and had a lot of enthusiasm and creative vision for it. But he hit the reset button, if you will, pick some of his favorite parts from the original black and white series and some of the different series and kind of create a new Nickelodeon universe to build on and tell stories, tweak a character here, nudge a character there, but give a foundation where they can bring in lots of different ideas and characters from other places. I just, it just was fantastic. I just love, the fact that, the very first episode, they go aground for the first time. They meet April, so it really allowed everybody to come in at a point where they can enter the story again, whether you're an original fan or a new fan.
Yeah, not only that, but they discover pizza for the first time. Like, what a great moment. What a great moment for Turtles fans to see them discover pizza after eating algae their whole lives. It's great, yeah.
I think it's food. It's not like any food I ever saw.
I'll try it. Yuck. You guys won't like it. I'll take the rest.
No way! Back off!
A few years ago, when they were coming out with a new live-action Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film, you were brought on as a consultant. What was that experience like?
It was really exciting. It was, I'd worked with two of the original producers that stayed on with Scott Mednick and Galen Walker, and they had an idea of where they wanted to take the movie. When they brought in director Jonathan Liebsman, that was Michael Bay and Jonathan Liebsman came in, and that's the thing. If you're going to direct a movie, you have to have a vision, you have to have a direction, and where you want to take the see the characters go to and evolve. Because it was also, yes, they've been on Nickelodeon as the animated series, and we had the comic series, but it's with the movie franchise, you have to almost do the same thing, a reintroduction, and do all that. So I worked pretty closely with Jonathan Liebsman, and his vision from day one was to make the best turtle movie ever, and really bring the characters out in a way that the first movie would be more of April's story, how she met the turtles, how they evolved into what they became before you dig into the other Turtles universe.
A lot of elements from the IDW comic, with like April kind of naming them and having that sort of...
Yeah, it was great because I think Jonathan took the same direction as pulling some of his, some of the favorite bits from different Turtle universes and doing it that way. But no, it was exciting to be part of it. It was exciting to see the turtles in CG for the first time. I know some of the fan reaction wasn't as positive as we'd hoped.
They're massive.
Should they have noses?
Yeah.
But those are, that was what's fantastic. That was actually based on a original Mirage series we did with an artist named Michael Zulli.
Cool.
The mid-'30s, he did an issue where he was a naturalist, a nature artist, and his version of the turtles were more realistic than ours. And so elements for the movie were literally pulled in from some of the original black and white comic books. But no, I thought the movie had the same thing as all the other interpretations. As it had the same heart and soul. The turtles were all there. The father figures. One was there. Pizza.
Absolutely, my favorite moment, which I just feel was like pure Turtles, was them riding up in the elevator.
I was just gonna say.
I can imagine the fan reaction has been the same, where they're just going up to fight a bunch of bad guys and they just start jamming out. I'm like, those are my boys. That's it. Those are the guys. They did it.
MC.
Where I started out was, again, reading Jack Kirby comic books, and why I like Jack Kirby so much was he was a complete creator as well most of the time, especially with the Kamani stuff. He wrote it, he edited it, he drew it, and And that's what I liked, that he was in full control of everything that went on that page.
Yeah.
And that was the inspiration I had early on, was like, that's, I don't want to be just an inker. I don't want to be just a penciler or a writer. I want to be somebody that does everything, the complete artist. And every time I went into any other kind of related entertainment, whether it's, animation, I love animation, but it takes an important and a lot of people to make something.
It's a collaborative effort.
Collaborative effort. And I thought that, even when I went down to, I've done storyboards for films and some other things, but when I went down to see the first Turtle movie on set, was watching Steve Barron standing in the middle of this, street with like 100 people around him.
Yeah.
And it's just one guy has to control all these elements to make this one, 20-second shot on film
it's
work.
Amazing.
And I just thought to myself, it's amazing any film comes out good ever.
Yeah.
And how lucky I am that I get to sit in my studio by myself, whatever I think of in my head and can draw, then I can draw. And so that's...
With an unlimited budget, I might add, too.
With an unlimited budget.
You are the curator of a museum.
Yes.
Right? Tell us a little bit about what it is and what you do.
Thanks. No, IDW, when they relocated their offices, one of the components was that they wanted to add a gallery space to really showcase comics as comic book art and that kind of...
Beautiful.
So, my wife Courtney and I were both very passionate about it. We actually had told Ted and Robbie at one point our 5-year plan was that we'd love to have a gallery of our own. And so Courtney and I came in and helped them, design the space, get the space to where it is now, including it's got my actual working studio is in there, all my turtle collectibles.
A recreation of your studio.
Yeah, it's a recreation,
insane.
but it's like literally everything in that studio is mine. It's something that either this comic books that I had from when I was 9 years old that are in the studio. So, and that was an important part of the vision, was that, it's one thing you can walk into a gallery space and you can see all this beautiful comic book art around the walls, but I felt that if you saw the actual space that is created in that, the people will actually see, like, somebody actually sits here and draws this stuff that then becomes this on the wall, these beautifully drawn pages, these beautiful detailed panels, because I do think, some people at some points think that it's just kind of stamped out in a factory somewhere.
Absolutely.
They don't put like somebody actually writing and drawing.
It comes from a human hand. Absolutely. That's amazing. That's inspiring. It's I'm sure that it's trying to recreate that feeling that you had when you were a kid and you realized this came from somebody's hand. Somebody can do this for a living. This is somebody trying to share their ideas and passion with me through their art. And I know how important preserving comic book art especially has been throughout your entire career.
Yes.
And I know that that's how you and Peter, way back in the day, first bonded. You went to his apartment and he had an original Kirby pencil, and you had never seen that with your own eyes. And I'd love that. I think that's so great. That's so important.
No, it is. You think that, even when I was young, I mentioned I loved art history and that kind of stuff. And my dad and my folks would take me to museums, and, it's I would literally just try to stand I'd get as close to the paintings as I could, because once you see the physical original art, you can see how the brushstrokes were made and how it was done. You can it's inspiring that, again, you sort of make that absolute connection that some real person, sat there for hours and hours and hours and created this beautiful work of art. And that's, and as you said, I've been passionate about it my whole life. And I think that, the San Diego Comic Art Gallery is literally the only one in the country at this point that's, dedicated specifically to comic book art. And there's fun shows, there's lots of hands-on stuff for kids, and it's a lot of fun stuff. So, my favorite part of when I do conventions and tours and we do these things, we talk and meet and greet the fans. The first thing I always do is I stand up there and I go, I'm up here, talking about turtles 32 years later, and I say, and I go, it's all your fault. And I point to the audience and go, it's your fault and your fault and your fault. And I say, thank you, thank you, thank you, because I would not have the greatest job in the universe without, the support of the fans that have, been so passionate all these years. So I really do have the greatest job in the world, and I appreciate it. So
awesome.
Thanks.
Well,
awesome
thank you so much, Kevin Eastman. That was great. Thanks
My
a lot.
pleasure. Cowabunga.
Hope you guys enjoyed my conversation with Turtle Papa Kevin Eastman as much as I did, but I would love to know who you want to hear in the seat across from me. So find Nick Animation on social media and let him know on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Tumblr, and Facebook. You're not going to want to miss an episode of the Nickelodeon Animation Podcast, so please come back, visit us next week on nickanimationpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts for more episodes and tons of bonus content like photos from the podcast of Kevin and myself, and probably a few shots of Kevin signing all the turtle stuff that I brought from home. I am such a geek. Thanks to the awesome crew who puts this podcast together. This podcast is produced by
Jonathan Highlander,
Dana Vasquez-Eberhard, Kelly Smith,
Andrew Hubner.
original music by Useful Creatures. All of the incredible social media for our podcast is made by
Narbe Manassians, Greg Nix,
and thanks to the man who works the controls and makes me sound better than I have a right to,
Manny Gralva.
Until next time, thanks for listening to the Nickelodeon Animation Podcast, and keep watching cartoons.